What am I going to do? Every day you have to make a decision about everything. You make a good decision or a bad one. I'm going to be on stage. Do I want to look like I have no confidence? I'm afraid?
Picture this. London, 1978. The air inside the Marquee Club is thick with smoke, sweat, and electricity. Chrissie Hynde, sharp-eyed, leather-clad, and fiercely independent, leans against the bar, watching the so-called gods of rock stagger under the weight of their own legends. By then, she'd seen it all. The affairs, the rivalries, the endless nights of lust disguised as love. But what few knew was that Chrissie had lived among those myths, loved some, fought others, and survived them all. And decades later, she's finally ready to expose the 7 worst womanizers of the 1970s, the men who shaped her story, broke her heart, and defined a generation of chaos. It all began with the one man who embodied everything dangerous, magnetic, and untamed about that decade: Iggy Pop. Iggy Pop was pure danger in leather. The first time Chrissie met him in the early 70s, he was already a storm wrapped in human skin, a man who sang like he was clawing his way out of the grave. She saw him on stage, shirtless, bleeding, wild-eyed, tearing at the microphone like it owed him something. Off stage, he was no calmer. His magnetism was undeniable, but his life was a rolling thunder of excess. There were nights when he'd disappear into a haze of drugs, women, and destruction, only to re-emerge hours later with a grin that said he'd cheated death again. Chrissie admired his rawness, but pitied the chaos that followed him. The broken hearts, the broken bottles, the endless backstage flings that burned out faster than his stage lights. Iggy Pop wasn't evil. He was art and madness fused into one, but he left destruction in his wake. And if he was fire, then the next man she met was smoke, seductive, smooth, and impossible to resist. Mick Jagger. You probably heard of Mick Jagger, the Rolling Stone who could charm an audience with a single smirk. When Chrissie crossed paths with him during sessions at Olympic Studios, she was still the outsider trying to carve her place in the British rock world. Mick, already a living legend, radiated the kind of confidence that came from being adored by millions. But up close, his charm was like a performance, calculated, controlled, intoxicating. Women followed him like moths to a flame, and Mick never bothered to blow them away. To him, seduction wasn't an act of love, it was part of the show. Chrissie saw through it. She saw the loneliness in his eyes when the lights went down, the exhaustion in his grin after another conquest. Fame had made him untouchable, but it had also made him hollow. Behind the glitz and swagger, there was a man terrified of being forgotten.
When we got in bands, we weren't trying to be famous, we were trying to be anti-establishment and not mix with society. It was kind of more of a not really underground. I mean, we never really was in it for the fame or the money. We just wanted to. It didn't work that way,
Jagger taught her that fame was the most seductive drug of all, and the one that could kill your soul. If Mick was the emperor of temptation, the next man in Chrissie's story was the storm itself. Ray Davies. Ray Davies of the Kinks wasn't just a lover to Chrissie. He was the tempest that nearly wrecked her. Their connection began in the restless London summer of the late 70s, when punk was rising and egos were colliding. Ray was already a legend, the sharp-tongued genius who could slice through hearts with lyrics alone. To Chrissie, he was irresistible, a man whose mind sparked with brilliance and whose moods shifted like the weather. Their love was electric, impulsive, and utterly volatile. They'd spend nights writing together, their chemistry blazing across the room, only to end the evening in an argument that rattled the walls. He could be charming one moment and cruel the next. Fame had made him fragile, and Chrissie's rising success only fueled his jealousy. He wanted her close, but never equal. The very independence that drew him to her also infuriated him. Their fights became legend, whispered through the London scene. Two titans of creativity locked in a battle that neither could win. There were moments of tenderness, too, quiet mornings after the chaos, when they'd sit with coffee and cigarettes, the air thick with unspoken apologies. But those moments were fleeting. Ray's infidelity cut deepest. Each betrayal left a scar that no song could mend. His need for control became suffocating, his affection tangled with pride and insecurity. Chrissie tried to make it work, for the love they shared and for the daughter who would become the fragile proof of that turbulent bond. But by the end, their relationship was a wreckage of passion and pain, a love story set to the wrong tempo. Ray's brilliance had turned inward, devouring the joy they once had. For Chrissie, he wasn't just one of the worst womanizers. He was the one who left her heart both awakened and wounded, forever changing the way she would love again. When the ashes of that love finally cooled, Chrissie found herself staring into the eyes of another legend, one far younger, far more self-destructive, and doomed to implode: Sid Vicious. Sid Vicious was the wild child of punk, and when Chrissie met him, she saw both the boy and the monster inside. In those early days, before the chaos consumed him, Sid was just a shy, awkward kid trying to prove himself in a world that rewarded destruction. She remembered him hanging around clubs in London, leather jacket too big for his thin frame, eyes darting between admiration and confusion. There was an innocence buried beneath the aggression, but it was fading fast. When the Sex Pistols took off, everything around him became a blur of drugs, fame, and manipulation. Sid was lost long before he realized it, a pawn in the Pistols' circus of self-destruction. His relationship with Nancy Spungen turned his descent into tragedy. It was a union made of addiction, obsession, and violence, wrapped in the illusion of love. Chrissie saw the bruises, the fear, the way they fed off each other's pain like it was the only thing keeping them alive. She tried to steer him toward sanity, tried to remind him that there was life beyond chaos, but Sid had already surrendered to the myth of his own legend. There were nights she'd see him stumbling through Soho streets, eyes glazed, his laughter echoing through the dark like a ghost's warning. He wasn't cruel, just completely untethered, a boy pretending to be a monster because that's what the world expected him to be. By the time he died in 1979, she wasn't surprised, only hollow. The news hit like a silence that no music could fill. Sid wasn't a womanizer in the traditional sense. He didn't charm, he consumed. He devoured every ounce of life, love, and energy around him until there was nothing left. Every woman who came near him paid the price, and Chrissie, watching from a distance, knew she had just witnessed punk's saddest prophecy come true. But if Sid's chaos was a hurricane, then Lemmy's was thunder, loud, unapologetic, and oddly comforting. Lemmy Kilmister from Motorhead was, in Chrissie's words, a paradox, a womanizer with a strange kind of honor. They had been close friends since her early London days, sharing drinks, jokes, and a mutual understanding that neither could belong to anyone. Lemmy loved women, many of them, but unlike others, he never lied about it. He was brutally honest, even tender beneath the grit. There was something disarming about the way he could make a woman laugh while sipping whiskey, then lean back with a grin that said he'd seen it all and survived it twice. They would talk for hours in dim London pubs about music, politics, and the absurdity of fame. Beneath the noise, he was kind, a gentleman wrapped in chaos. Yet his lifestyle, whiskey-fueled nights, endless affairs, a revolving door of lovers, was a slow form of suicide. His heart belonged to the road, to the music, to the moment. Chrissie knew Lemmy was dangerous to love but impossible to hate. He treated her with respect, something rare in that world, and she always sensed a hidden sadness behind his rough exterior. His honesty could cut deep. It was a strange kind of cruelty that came from truth, not malice. Lemmy's version of romance was fleeting, burning bright, gone by dawn. To Chrissie, he was proof that even honesty can wound when love isn't part of the equation. He was the embodiment of the contradiction she saw in so many men of that era. Tough on the outside, terrified on the inside, desperate to feel alive. And yet, As Lemmy's laughter echoed into memory, the story of another man began to rise, a different kind of chaos, sleeker, sadder, and painted in the neon of New York City. His name was Johnny Thunders. Johnny Thunders of the New York Dolls was both friend and heartbreak waiting to happen. When Chrissie moved between London and New York, their paths crossed in the city's raw punk underbelly, a world lit by neon and fueled by adrenaline. He was beautiful in a dangerous way, his cheekbones sharp, his voice cracked with pain, his guitar screaming like a confession. Johnny was the very definition of a doomed romantic, a heroine poet who lived for chaos more than connection. Every night he was surrounded by women who mistook his brokenness for depth, who thought love could fix what addiction had already claimed. None could save him. He was always chasing something that wasn't there: peace, redemption, or maybe just the next high. Chrissie remembered walking through dim New York streets with him after gigs, the night air thick with the sound of taxis and heartbreak. He'd laugh one minute, fall silent the next, staring off like he was listening to a melody only he could hear. She saw the crash coming long before it arrived, his health fading, his music turning darker, his circle shrinking until only ghosts remained. His need for destruction always outweighed his need for love, and his early death in 1991 felt less like a tragedy and more like an epilogue that had been written from the start. To Chrissie, Johnny Thunders was the last true romantic of rock's dark age, a man who mistook pain for passion, who sang like every note was a goodbye. He was beautiful, brilliant, and broken beyond repair. And when he was gone, the silence he left behind spoke louder than his music ever could. By the time the decade came to an end, Chrissie realized that the men weren't just lovers or legends. They were reflections of a scene eating itself alive, a mirror of everything beautiful and doomed about the 70s. By 1979, Chrissie had seen the worst of the industry: the vanity, the drugs, the violence, the false promises. The punk scene that began as rebellion had become a machine that ate its own. Every backstage room smelled of sweat and desperation. The men she had loved or lost to chaos were victims of their own making. She survived by keeping her armor on, her leather jacket, her guitar, her sharp tongue. While others burned out, she kept writing, fueled not by fame but by fury. She realized that the worst womanizers weren't born that way. They were created by a culture that celebrated recklessness and punished sincerity. And when the noise finally faded, when the lights dimmed and the crowd thinned, one truth remained: Chrissie Hynde had outlived them all. Years later, Chrissie stands on stage, guitar slung low, her eyes fierce beneath the lights. The crowd roars, but she hears something else: the echoes of a decade long gone. The faces of those men flash before her: Iggy, Mick, Ray, Sid, Lemmy, Johnny, each one a ghost from the wild nights and shattered mornings of her youth. They had once towered over her world like gods, but now they were memories, faint and fading. She had walked through their chaos, survived their betrayals, and emerged stronger. The woman once dismissed as a punk girl from Ohio had become one of rock's last true survivors. Her voice still slices through the noise, raw, unapologetic, and unbreakable. It carries the ache of everything she endured and the triumph of everything she overcame. She no longer hates the womanizers, she pities them. They were prisoners of their own illusions, victims of the fame that once made them untouchable. Chrissie had seen the cost of that kind of life, and she had refused to pay it. Instead, she turned their madness into her melody, their betrayal into her armor. As she strums the final chord, her gaze drifts over the crowd, a sea of faces, young and old, all singing her words back to her. In that moment, she feels peace. Because in the end, she didn't just expose the worst of them, she outlasted them. And the song, the truth, belongs to her now.